Hi, I'm Jim Ward of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode in our History Bites series. Today we will discuss the battles of Lexington and Concord, which are often referred to as the shot heard round the world. Starting in 1764, Great Britain enacted a series of measures aimed at raising revenue from its 13 American colonies. Many of those measures, including the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, and Townshend Acts, generated fierce resentment among the colonists, who protested against taxation without representation. Boston, the site of the 1770 Boston Massacre and the 1773 Boston Tea Party, was one of the main points of resistance. The tax on tea would remain a flashpoint and a contributing factor to the Boston Tea Party of 1773, in which angry colonists destroyed an entire shipment of tea in Boston Harbor. To quell resistance and punish the colonists, particularly the demonstrators in Boston, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts of 1774, which colonists referred to as the Intolerable Acts. The four Intolerable Acts included the Massachusetts Government Act, instituting an appointed government over the previously elected local one, the Boston Port Bill, closing Boston Harbor, the Administration of Justice Act, which dictated that British officials could be tried in another colony or in England if charged with capital offenses, and the Quartering Act, which said unoccupied buildings could be used to quarter British troops. On April 18, 1775, Joseph Warren, a physician and member of the Sons of Liberty, learned from a source inside the British High Command that British troops would march that night on Concord, Massachusetts. Warren dispatched two couriers, silversmith Paul Revere and tanner William Dawes, to alert residents of the news. They went by separate routes in case one of them was captured. Revere crossed the Charles River by boat to get to Charlestown, where fellow patriots were waiting for a signal about the movement of British troops. The patriots had been instructed to look at the steeple of Boston's Old North Church, which was visible to them because it was the highest point in the city. If there was one lantern hanging in the steeple, the British were arriving by land. If there were two, the British were coming by sea. 2 lanterns were set out. As Revere carried out his mission in Charlestown, Dawes left Boston and traveled along the Boston Neck Peninsula. The two met up in Lexington, a few miles east of Concord, where Revolutionary leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock had temporarily holed up. Having persuaded those two to flee, a weary Revere and Dawes then set out again. On the road, they met a third rider, Samuel Prescott, who alone made it all the way to Concord. Revere was captured by a British patrol, while Dawes was thrown from his horse and forced to proceed to Lexington on foot. Revere's midnight ride provided the colonists with vital information about British intentions. Some 700 British troops spent the evening of April 18, 1775, forming ranks on Boston Common, with orders to seize the colonial armory at Concord. The lengthy public display ensured that the commander of all British troops in North America, General Thomas Gage, had lost any chance at secrecy, and by the time the force had been transported across the Charles River to Cambridge, it was 2 a.m. in the following morning. The march to Lexington was an exercise in misery. It began in a swamp, and the British were forced to wade through brackish water that was, in places, waist deep. At sunrise on April 19th, 77 Lexington militiamen, led by Captain John Parker, assembled on the town green. They weren't looking for a fight, just to stand their ground. Parker reportedly said, quote, "Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here," end quote. Officers on both sides ordered their troops to hold their positions, but not to fire their weapons. Around 5 a.m., British Major John Pitcairn arrived with his troops. Outnumbering the militia 5-1, he shouted for the colonists to disperse. The heavily outnumbered militiamen, which was colonial militia ready to fight at a minute's notice, had just been ordered by their commander to disperse when a shot rang out. To this day, no one knows which side fired first. Several British volleys were subsequently unleashed before order could be restored. When the smoke cleared, 8 militiamen lay dead and 9 were wounded, while only 1 redcoat was injured. The British then continued into Concord to search for arms, not realizing that the vast majority had already been relocated. They decided to burn what little they found, and the fire got slightly out of control. Hundreds of militiamen occupying the high ground outside of Concord incorrectly thought the whole town would be torched. The militiamen hustled to Concord's North Bridge, which was being defended by a contingent of British soldiers. The British fired first, but fell back when the colonists returned the volley. This was the shot heard round the world, later immortalized by poet Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was not the only artist moved to depict the battle. Painter Amos Doolittle, known as the Revere of Connecticut, created 4 celebrated engravings of the battles of Lexington and Concord. After searching Concord for about 4 hours, the British prepared to return to Boston, located 18 miles away. By that time, almost 2,000 militiamen had descended to the area, and more were constantly arriving. At first, the militiamen simply followed the British column. Fighting started soon again after, however, with the militiamen firing at the British from behind trees, stone walls, houses, and sheds. Before long, British troops were abandoning weapons, clothing, and equipment in order to retreat faster. When the British column reached Lexington, it ran into an entire brigade of fresh redcoats that had answered a call for reinforcements. But that did not stop the colonists from resuming their attack all the way through Menotomy, now Arlington, and Cambridge. The British, for their part, tried to keep the colonists at bay with flanking parties and cannon fire. In the evening, a contingent of newly arrived Minutemen from Salem and Marblehead, Massachusetts, purportedly had a chance to cut off the redcoats and perhaps finish them off. Instead, their commander ordered them not to attack, and the British were able to reach the safety of Charlestown Neck, where they had naval support. Those killed and wounded at the battles of Lexington and Concord numbered 273 British and 95 Americans. In the wake of Lexington and Concord, General Gage found Boston was faced by a huge militia of men who had arrived from throughout New England to fight for liberty. Numbering 20,000, this resolute force would become part of the Continental Army. The relatively low casualties of the battles of Lexington and Concord proved that they could stand up to one of the most powerful armies in the world. News of the battle quickly spread, reaching London on May 28th. A few months later, the British narrowly defeated the Americans in the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775, the low number of casualties once again showing the strength of the Patriot forces. On July 3, 1775, General George Washington assumed command of the American forces at Cambridge. Not only did he have to contain the British in Boston, but he also had to recruit a Continental Army. During the winter of 1775 to 76, recruitment lagged so badly that fresh drafts of militia were called up to help maintain the siege. In 1781, the British surrendered at Yorktown, Virginia, which marked the unofficial end of the American Revolution. 2 years after that, the Treaty of Paris was signed between the two initial warring parties and American ally France. The actions at Concord, at Lexington earlier that same day, and along the stretch of Massachusetts countryside now remembered simply as Battle Road, weren't just battles, they were a declaration. The colonists would no longer bow to a distant king. They would fight for their rights, their homes, and their future. As Ralph Waldo Emerson later wrote, it was the shot heard round the world, the moment liberty took its stand. The shots heard round the world transitioned the war of words to one of bullets and the long trek to American independence. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.